My name is Raj Kumar. I'm president and editor-in-chief of Devex. I want to welcome all of you to this session, especially those of you joining us online and on social. This is the Impact Summit at the World Economic Forum here in New York City. It is a dynamic couple of days of sessions about the future of the world, how we can all make a positive influence on that future. And one of the things you'll notice here in 2018 is probably a third of the people you see walking the halls here at the Impact Summit have a little colorful pin on their lapel. I'm not wearing one now, neither is anybody in this panel, but that little colorful
But we do
pin,
have it.
I'm sure you do. we got the colors. Those are the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure to those who are following this discussion online are pretty well known. But it's interesting because here at a place like the Impact Summit, or if you go out to the development community that we at Devex cover, everybody knows the Sustainable Development Goals. But you go out more broadly, and I actually wear the pin as kind of an experiment when I go to other things like the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I find that broad media, mainstream media, they're not so familiar with it. The average consumer, not so familiar. At the same time, the movement toward purpose is growing. The consumers, they care. They care about what are in the SDGs. They care about the issues of health and hunger and environment that are there. And you can see that in the way corporations are moving and responding to them. So what we want to talk about today is how do we connect those things? How do we get the SDGs to really connect to this purpose movement that's out there? And we've got an incredible group of panelists here to help us in this conversation, people who are really working on these issues in three really different ways. So I think we're going to have a great discussion. And I want to ask Claudia, Romo, Edelman to kind of get us kicked off, because Claudia, you're a real pioneer in this. So in the global development space, communications and brand building was almost a bad word like 20 or 25 years ago. People thought, oh, we're all about mission, we're about impact, we can't spend time thinking about how to communicate. And you were early on a real leader on this, saying, no, we've got to connect the work we're doing, the important work we're doing, with the public. These have to be shared goals. So you've led communications and marketing and branding at places like the Human Rights Commission, at the UNHCR, at the Global Fund, at the UN with the Secretary General working on the SDGs. So I want to start with you to kind of give us the big picture and the data. Like why does this matter? What is this purpose? Consumer-driven kind of purpose mindset out there in the world today, how might we connect it to the SDG agenda?
Yeah, and I think that overall the reason to pay attention is because it is a wake-up call, and if not the last call for brands and for companies to start paying attention to, like the SDGs as a great framework to do communication and do integration of all the things that you're doing anyways. And one of the things that it is surprising to me is that there is so much negativity, there's so much negative news happening out there that 50% of the world, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer, have disconnected from the news. And 30% of those 50 have said it's because it depresses them and it doesn't reflect what they're doing and their passions. And if you start thinking about that, you might think, well, the world might be going into a bad place, but as a fact, there's a great deal of beauty and there's a great deal of hope out there, and there's an increasing number of champions that are making a difference, like the people in this panel. And the best news of all is that not only we have a framework and a master plan, like the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a master plan for the future of the people on the planet, but there's a market. Because consumers are increasingly buying with their beliefs and voting with their hearts. 66% of millennials in America have said that they will actually buy from companies that have a heart. And that's not only in America, 73% in China, 75% in India, 66% in Mexico is global, and it's increasing. And it's not only as consumers, but also as employers. People will want to, like in a world where we're all going to start living until we're 120 years old, you will have a choice. And companies will have to actually attract talent, and talent in now, not let alone the future, in today, are willing to work for companies that have a heart and align with their own values. Right. And 67% of people around the world will start punishing companies that don't have a stand. So silence is no longer an option. And I am sure that a lot of organizations, corporations, and individuals are already doing a lot of things, and be gender equality, be, like equal pay, be health and nutrition. But the good news about the Sustainable Development Goals is that everything is within it. So it's a very useful framework to not only, like align your efforts and your strategy, but also communicate it, because communicating progress will be increasingly important for the consumer and the staff of the future.
You're absolutely right. And sometimes these shifts happen slowly enough that we don't even really notice. So
Yeah,
you
no,
walk
this is
into-
not slowly. This is
Right,
going like that.
It's now moving. It's really shifting. The paradigm is shifting. You go into a Starbucks and you see the coffee of the day is from Rwanda or Guatemala, and you don't think anything of it. It's just, oh, of course, this is how it is. This is normal. And the idea that big corporations are actually integrating their supply chains, that they're thinking about their employees and how to attract them based on values and mission, that they're appealing to their customers, saying we're positive players in the world. That integration is really a really powerful force. And you mentioned brands, so I want to go to Emmanuelle next. Emmanuelle is Wargon is with Danone, and she's the senior vice president there for corporate affairs and sustainability integration. So you're thinking every day about exactly these issues from a business perspective. How do you actually turn the SDGs into kind of a business plan for a major global corporation like Danone? So give us your perspective on this issue. How does it connect to the way you think of your customers, your supply chain, your employees? Emmanuelle.
Well, thanks for inviting me into this great panel. The way we think at Danone is that there is no more sustainability on one hand and business on the other hand. We really do need to integrate, because people are not consumers on one hand and citizens on the other hand. They are basically people. And all the trends in the markets, Claudia was quoting a lot of figures in the great barometer that Edelman is publishing every year, show that consumers are really asking now for companies to commit, and they will follow brands with a purpose. So we are working at various levels. First level is the strategic level. We issued our long-term agenda for 2030 at the same date as the SDGs. We have 9 goals, which are business goals, integrating both efficiency, profitability, value creation, but also the idea to be certified as a B Corp, as a biggest corporation to be, and being sustainable both for planet and for health. So we have an integrated strategic agenda which is not separating anymore business and sustainability. We are convinced that we will create value through sustainability. This agenda we engage with our employees. We have more than 100,000 employees, and we are co-building this with them right now through a consultation to help us frame this long-term objective. But we want to go all the way to the consumers, because we are very confident that value will come from it. And I will give you a few examples. In France, we created our first Green Friday. It was last Friday, actually, so 3 days ago, a week ago now. For the first time, we said we would dedicate 1 day of turnover, so complete turnover of the company in France, all brands, to agriculture, sustainable agriculture. And we went on a campaign to consumers with our company brand and our tagline, which is Danone, One Planet, One Health, to explain that everybody can contribute. And what we are saying is every time you eat and you drink, you can vote for the world you want to live in. If you buy a Danone product on this Green Friday, the money will go to sustainable agriculture. And all our French brands are following this campaign, this unified campaign. So it's really powerful. We don't have the results yet because it's 3 days ago. And we'll see where it goes. And we had employees in shops, more than 1,000 people meeting the consumers in shops to explain. So it's a very powerful experience. And we are doing these kinds of things in other countries. My second and last example is in Mexico. We have been building a partnership with UN Women because we have a strong parental policy which has been recognized as a champion by the He for She program. And this policy we want to leverage to consumers. So our water brand in Mexico called Bonafont created a big gender diversity campaign with awareness and with special products with the He for She partnership. So basically we had a pink bottle for gentlemen and a black bottle for women, just trying to provoke, idea of unconscious bias, and with a big campaign. And it was also very successful, both for the awareness and also for the brand. So we do think there is value creation here.
It shows you the power when brands get engaged on issues like these. The number of touch points to consumers. You have 100,000 employees, first of all, so thinking of that scale. But then consumers all over the world who, through your product, can get this kind of purpose message. So thank you for those examples. I want to switch gears a little and go to Mariana Vasconcelos, who is here in your capacity as a co-founder of a startup. You started Agrosmart, which is an internet solutions for the agribusiness sector company. And give us your perspective on this, because we talked a little bit before we began the discussion, the importance of making this real, that this can't just be a campaign that's kind of a marketing ploy. It's got to actually connect to fundamentally changing the issues that we're trying to drive when we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. How do we do that?
I think first, when we talk about communication, this is so important because it's not only on the big corporate level, it's also about entrepreneurship. And when you look like into this forum and the tech pioneers, you see how many business are related to purpose, are related to impact. So it doesn't change only the way the big companies make decisions, but it also changes why we start our business and starts to make clear that it is possible to cause real impact while you make money and create business around it. That's not a bad thing. You can make money, but you can also make good. So these start like a whole level of change on the entrepreneurship and on the consumer level. And I think in agriculture, that's never was never so real than it is now. And the consumer behavior makes a change because now they push those companies like Danone here, to start thinking about it. And those companies push the farmer, so the farmer can be aware of their impact on the environment. So they start worrying about the chemicals they use, the water they use, and how do they do that more sustainable. We are also talking about climate change and how we need a collaboration within this ecosystem, and communication can make that bond of many players in the ecosystem to work together to fight climate change. So I think like the communication, and people want to hear the good stories. Everyone is tired, so there is an appetite from the media and from the consumer worldwide that they do prefer to buy those brands. So me as a technology company, we believe we are an enabler for that challenge because we can leapfrog the metrics and the way you communicate impact, because you can bring transparency and be fast to understand the results, if your campaign was good or not, or if your farm and your supply chain are transparent enough. So I think we have a lot to grow on that way, but we do have the challenge that when the big companies start doing that and they start having the impact and the attention from the media and the consumers, then they just stop there. So that's, I think, the main challenge on like how do we use the communication and the media to empower the development and the social impact and the conversion of the traditional business into impact-oriented technologies and practices. But how don't they stop there just after the first campaign and this is enough? How do we keep fighting for it, even we already got the marketing results we wanted, but to have real change and real impact?
Thank you for that. And you talked about good stories, and I totally agree. And I would just add to that, I think what people are hungry for are good stories, but also real stories. Because this is hard work. This is not easy to take a huge corporation and really transform your supply chain, really change the way you present your products to customers. These are huge investments, big decisions, and they're hard to do. And I think people want to hear about the real challenges that are embedded in that, because if you care about purpose, you care about the real story. You care about what's really happening in the world. I also think nowadays what's shifted so much is we used to have this dichotomy. You're either a nonprofit or you're a for-profit, right? You're out there to make money or you've got a mission. And it's so clear, especially with the younger generation coming into the workforce, that they don't want to make that choice. They want to do both. And we need to accept that, them as employees and as consumers. Speaking of real stories, Claudia, one of the things you have pioneered is this new podcast called Global Goals Cast, where you're trying to tell that real story in a more in-depth way, not just kind of greenwashing, which is the thing we're always worried about in this space, just telling a good story but not giving the real depth and making sure it connects to something. Tell me about that podcast and what you're doing with it. What's your goal?
There were two things. The first one is that every week when I was working in the executive office of the Secretary General, every week a little bit I felt like a shrink, because either, we had like a CEO, an ambassador, the president of a country, someone coming and telling me I was running comms for the SDGs, saying like, look, I am trying to bridge the gap between, equal pay in my company. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. And someone else would come and say, like, I am actually trying to impose, a no plastic policy, or I'm trying. And I was like, okay, so how can I help you? And they were like, I just wanted to tell you. And when you have that for a year, every week, you know that there's a need to talk and to be heard and to listen. And on the other hand, there is an absolute desire from people to hear from something else that they trust. You know, like if there's such a decline in trust in media, and this is not only from the Edelman Trust Barometer, but overall, then the real thing is, how are you going to get the stories out directly, and how are you going to incentivize CEOs and people to actually take alternative channels of communication that are intimate? And for me, one of the things that I adore are the numbers of growth of podcasts as well. 21 to 23% growth in a year, every year of podcasts. The audience is so affluent and so intelligent and so committed. And not only that, like only in America, there's 142 million people that consume podcasts, and 42 million of those consume 10 hours of podcast a week.
Wow.
That's junky material. I mean, like that's really seriously consumption of media. And if you start looking at cities all around the world growing, and the transportation time and the commute time will be increasingly important, podcast really is a great way to talk. And the thing that I love is that it's so intimate. You know, like you have the television or the newspaper there, your phone here. Podcast is inside of you. It's so intimate, and so nothing more interesting for me to explain the things that you cannot explain in 140 characters. Like you can't explain migration in 190 characters. No way. You have to do it in a way that presents the pros and the cons in a way that allows people to make their own decisions by listening to the stories and how does it really mean, so that you understand issues supposed to only fear them. And if you start putting the two and two together, the need to talk, purpose growing, and then podcast growing, the absolute necessary thing for me was to create a podcast about the global goals, to tell the stories of progress and the champions that are making a difference. So we started in Davos, and overall what I know is that there has been an incredible, not only, like I have a podcast called the Global Goals Cast, but there's a number of other channels that are popping up because there's so many stories. And so when you have Quartz and you have Devex and organizations that I truly admire and follow, those are the channels that we want to hear. And I want to hear from Danone directly, and I want to hear from Agrosmart directly. Yep. And I want to shout, guys, invest on the brand equity, invest on the SDG brand equity now that is cheap, because in the future, you know, like that ring that is really should represent the best of humanity, the same way that the Olympic rings represent almost like the best of sports. The ring of the SDGs should represent the best of humanity, and I would dream to see it in, you know, like in products like the back of cereals, the back of like yogurts, Danone, and so on. And this is a good time to actually use the SDGs as a framework in alternative channels, and brands should be speaking directly about, you know, like about what they're doing.
That's a great call to action. And you know, when the SDGs were created, a lot of people wondered, how will the private sector look at this? Will this be kind of a challenge to the private sector? And I've been surprised to see the uptake has been pretty dramatic. Companies seem to like the SDGs because they wanted a framework. They wanted a way to understand this. I wonder, Emmanuelle, from your perspective at Danone, how do you use the SDGs? Are they a beneficial tool to you? Are they something you feel like you just have to report against because they're out there? How do you view it internally, and how do you use them?
What is super interesting with the SDGs is the fact that it's a completely comprehensive framework. So within the 17, you really uncover every possible topic, and you have it in a global, systemic, integrative way. So with our strategic framework, we connected our goals to the SDGs to make sure the connection was here, and we use it as the overall strategy which help us go forward. We take topic by topic, and each brand can't cover every SDG, of course. And I think what is interesting is the journey and the authenticity of the journey. Because when we discuss consumer relation, I think authenticity, sincerity is probably what matters most. Because there are topics on which we are making stronger and stronger progress, but you can't solve complex matter from one day to the other. So the story we tell to consumer, for instance, if I go back to the French example, we are helping to transition to more sustainable agriculture practices. We are not going to turn the whole French agriculture from one model to the other. In the US, we decided to get out of GMO for half our dairy portfolio. And this, it was a decision taken over 2 years, and we are transitioning step by step. So I think it's very interesting to have it as a global goal and a common language. And the common language is super important. But then to translate this into concrete actions that brand can be proud of and that consumers can be proud of choosing us for, and to make it into a competitive advantage and to make it into value creation.
Thank you for that. Just thinking about the word authenticity, one of the positive signs we've seen at Devex, our audience are people who do global development work. And a few years ago, at the early stage of the SDGs, big brands would come to us and they would just want to put an ad on our website. They would want to sort of showcase in a very thin way, here's what we're doing. And increasingly now, they say, actually, we want to engage with your journalists and tell the real story. And we want to talk about the things that are not working as well as the things that are working, because that authenticity is so important. And consumers understand. Many of the environments we're talking about are very tough environments to work on. Many of the issues are very challenging. And if we don't engage in a real way, we'll never actually get there. Mariana, I'm wondering if you have thoughts listening to this conversation so far that you might want to jump in on, especially coming from a startup perspective. You integrated this from day one. You didn't have to go through kind of coming up with a new way to shift your business. You just started this way. Is this what you're seeing when you talk to other startup founders?
Yes, and it's actually very easy for us because we also use the SDGs as a framework. So when I communicate to an investor how I am a social business or an impact startup, I use SDGs. Or when I go to a corporate to try to make a partnership or a sale, I say, you have this challenge on these SDGs, and that's where I help you because I have this solution that can help you tackle that. So it creates a communication standard that makes it very easy. And I really like the authenticity because I think it's just so easy today to put the blame on someone else and just to say that the companies are evil and that they are aggressive to the environment. And in agriculture, we feel that. As Brazil, we feel that all the time, that everyone just say, oh, large-scale agriculture, and you are destroying the Amazon rainforest. And it's not actually like that. There's so many stories on sustainability practices in Brazilian agriculture has so much good examples, but it's hard. So when you enter the real story, like why does a farmer has to use chemicals? Why does a farmer use a GMO? There's reasons, like we have to fight pest and disease every day. It's really hard to make a decision. We have to fight climate change. So if you don't have the right genetic material, you just can't produce and then you won't have food. So when you enter in the story, you can create empathy. And I think empathy is the ultimate tool for changing the world.
Thank you for that. That's a great message. We have very limited time left, so I want to see if there are any questions here in the room before I go back and ask everyone to wrap up. Not seeing any right here. I'm going to ask all of you to think about the audience we have online and what kind of call to action you might have for them, right? So these are people who are clearly invested to some degree in the issues. They're following the Impact Summit online wherever they are in the world. How would you... what can they do in their community, in their capacity around the world, kind of advance this agenda that we're here to talk about today? Claudia, do you want to start us out?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that doing the right thing is, like everybody that is listening probably is in this because they are doing the right thing. But it's not only the right thing, it's the smart thing, but also it is the absolute needed thing, not only to be on sustainability, but I urge you all to communicate the progress that you're making and communicate with purpose and do it in an authentic way. What you were talking about, like brands now are coming to our podcast that has as a unique model 12 UN agencies, more than 45 non-for-profits. We're distributed by CBS and we're going into languages, but no one wants to listen to an ad, and corporations are coming and saying, I want to tell my sustainable story. And I want to say it in a way that is understandable and doesn't have any jargon. So I would say to people that are interested in this, just go communicate progress. There's a market out there. The world is really making progress, and we should just be talking about and highlighting the champions that are making the difference every time in an authentic way.
Great. Emmanuelle, any final thoughts for our...
Well, my message would really be stop splitting business and sustainability. It's really the same topic. Consumers are just asking for it. So we all need to think our business model ahead to make sure that we answer this, which is not a superficial trend, which is really the way the world is going to be. And then challenge your brands and the companies behind them and engage into an honest dialogue, because I think the challenge is positive and we will be up to it if the discussion goes in an authentic way.
Mariana?
I would say that we just don't follow the SDG agenda, but that we lead it. And everyone can lead it by making the right decisions. If you are a company, to hire technologists, to hire partners that are in the same way, or if you're just a consumer, just buy the brands that are doing it. And then educate other people, because we need the whole world engaged on it. So explain to other people why you are making the decisions you are making and why you buy a brand.
And I would just ask for all of you who are Devex readers to hold us accountable too. We're trying to tell these stories, but tell us, where are we missing? What stories are we missing out on? What stories are we saying are kind of success stories when they're not? Who should we be holding accountable? This is really our mission as a social enterprise, and so we need that kind of feedback from our audience and our readers. I want to thank all of you for being a part of this discussion. I know this is a long conversation that will continue across the summit, but thanks for taking some time to be a part of this today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.